Unearthing the elusive Istrian scale, from folk idioms to music composition, redefining and understanding the transformation. This research is about the metamorphosis of the Istrian scale, a unique cross-culture of Croatia, Slovenia, and Italy. The research follows the transformation of the scale from its folkloric origins on the Istrian peninsula on the northeastern coast of the Adriatic Sea through the music research, which later developed into musicology and ethnomusicology. Early researchers struggled to understand folk music because of their conservatory training. They were searching for what was before tonality in art music as modality. They were not aware of microtones, and they did not understand folk music was in pure or just temperament, while the piano was in equal tuning system. They went out into little towns around Istria, took notes, but once they got home to their pianos, they could not fit the melodies on the keyboard. As Ivan Matetic Rongo once wrote to a friend, it felt like a piano key should have been halved. During the Spring of Nations, or music nationalism, folk idioms were very wanted in classical output. They defined the nationality, broke the predominant Italian, French, and German tradition. And from here arose the idea to codifying the folkloric idioms into one concise formula that would fit the Western equal temperament. From here, we have the Istrian scale, the hexatonic tone roll, which was established and later expanded into an octatonic scale, and we will also see in research how it manifests in art music. The overview of this presentation. So we will see the Istrian Peninsula, the folk music and art music and the difference between them and what unifies them. We will see what's the difference between equal temperament and pure intonation, and we will talk a little bit about the music research. Among others, we will have the questions of why one would create a scale, who created the scale, and what is this scale? But we will also look at the Slovenian approach of the Slovenian composer Karel Pahor in his piece Istrijanka, the 15 miniatures for piano in the spirit of Istrian folk music. Istria is a triangular peninsula located on the northeastern coast of the Adriatic Sea, between the Gulf of Venice and Gulf of Kvarner. It spans the region bordered by the Italian Gulf of Trieste, the entire Slovenian coast, Croatian west coast down to the southern city of Pula, into the Kvarner Gulf and in the Croatian city of Rijeka, but also including the Croatian islands Krk, Cres, Lošinj and Drab. It's divided among three countries, Italy marked with orange, Slovenia with yellow, and Croatia in green. First mentioning of hill-foot settlers and pirates known as history tribes dates to 700 BC, but that ancient region extended over a much wider area, and once the Roman Empire conquered the land in 178 BC, the period of 2000 years of occupation began. This comes as no surprise, since the geolocation of Istria is ideally located. The natural wonders are breathtaking and climate was appealing to nobility of all nations throughout history. Proof lays in the architecture that remains to this day. That is why, culturally speaking, Istria is best described as a multicultural microcosmos. The territory of Istria has always been plurinationalistic and served as a nexus of cultural exchange among the Slavic, Latin, Roman, Hungarian, and Germanic cultures. Istria represents a unity of cultural differences, centuries-long spiritual and cultural sedimentation and intertwinement, painted with historical, ethnic, and linguistic shades. The difficulty for the researcher is that the language itself has been fluid. In the 19th century alone, the original language changed regularly depending on the occupying nation, between Italian, German, French, and lastly Serbo-Croatian until the dissolution of former Yugoslavia in 1995. Today, three official languages are Croatian, Slovenian, and Italian, with most cities remaining bilingual. But there are also four unstandardized languages: Venetian as a form of the Vulgar Latin, Istriot, a form of subdialect of Venetian origin, Istro-Romanian, which documents the settlement of Romanian mercenaries from Transylvania in the north, and finally the Peroi Montenegrin from southern Montenegro region. Istrian music is one of the most archaic, genuine expressions in this part of Europe. It's based on the non-tempered tonal system, a sequence of 6 tones interposition in such a way that no other tone can be placed between them. This is the basic difference when we compare it with tempered diatonic system of music played in modern Western classical tradition. This genuine music expression that carried over from generation to generation has been rooted in the essence of the people. Melography or note writing of this distinctive music has been made possible thanks to the great Croatian musicologist and composer Ivan Matetic Rongo, who lived between 1818 and 1960 and has deciphered the patterns of popular singing in this area, theoretically explained the essence of the music, and has fixed the hexatonic scale into a system of tight intervals, establishing thus the name the Istrian Scale. But this scale is not a completely unknown concept. In fact, in 2009, two-part singing and playing in the Istrian Scale has been added to UNESCO's list of intangible cultural heritage. It's the organization that seeks to identify and protect cultural heritage around the world. However, even after being listed of outstanding value to the humanity, there remains a systematic lack of a concise picture about the scale outside its territory. This research is different from those before because it looks in detail at the metamorphosis into classical piano compositions of Slovenian composers, and it does not deal with folk instruments, vocal music, and musical lyric references. Folk music is the product of oral tradition. It's handed down through generations without a traceable composer, and it often arises from among peasant populations. It is rarely notated in its original form, and the researchers are ethnomusicologists. In Istria, it usually takes the form of two-part singing in pure intonation. We also can say two-part playing, as you will see it in the next example. There are 4 types of such singing and playing in Istria as kanat, tarankanje, bugarjenje, and deskant two-part singing. Here we have an example of bugarjenje, where 2 voices move in non-tempered parallel intervals, seconds and diminished thirds. I put an example of how they try to notate it because I wanted to present how difficult this looks for a classical pianist. Instead of an established tonal key, we have 1 sharp, 1 double sharp, 1 flat, 1 double flat, and another flat. So it becomes really difficult when trying to play this on the piano. Besides, it's not accurate. In the Istrian folk two-part singing and playing, we have 2 voices that move in narrow intervals, approximately half or 1.5 tone apart. The melodies are in narrow range, only 4 or 5 tones. Ending is always in unison, which means on the same note, or in an octave. Most times they move in parallel. Only in the deskant two-part singing, the voices move in contrary motion, or if there is a drone tone, that one stays always the same. It is in unique tuning system, not conforming to equal temperament, and 2 parts means it's horizontally guided, which is different than the 4-voice vertical harmony in art music. I did put an example from early writings so that we see what was the struggle. The most problematic was when two voices got together. As you can see, the first attempt was this, which did not work. So they tried to double flat it. But that also did not work. Early music researchers seeking to notate Istrian folk songs soon realized the limitations of Western notation, as attempts to capture these nebulous pitches often resulted in imprecise simulations. These inaccuracies, however, were discounted in favor of novelty. Mathematical accuracy aside, the Istrian scale would be best expressed with quarter tone notation. Pure intervals could easily be deciphered when not trying to fit them into equal temperament system of tuning, although this approach was unfamiliar to musicologists from the past who, in their fair attempt to systemize it accordingly to their academic upbringing, believed the ability to preserve this tradition laid in their hands and making it employable for new compositions. Let's look just at the difference in scales. C major scale, C minor scale, and now Istrian scale starting from C. Once again, the minor and the Istrian. Equal temperament. So this microtonal nature of the Istrian folk tunes posed significant challenges, as we said, to their transcription into Western notation. The concept of 12 equal semitones, also called equal temperament, in the art and concert music gained prominence in the mid-1700s as a means of facilitating the tuning of keyboard instruments to play in all keys with minimal flaws in intonation. Equal temperament replaced earlier tuning systems that were based on acoustically pure intervals, such as Pythagorean tuning. These previous tuning systems are still in use for music before Bach. Most Istrian vocal and instrumental folk music does not correspond with instruments tuned in equal temperament, such as piano, but to pure intervals of just temperament. Further complicating matters is the Istrian folk tradition of pitch bending. Istrian folk singers manipulate selected pitches within a melody. When done in tandem, this manipulation has the effect of augmenting and diminishing vertical intervals beyond recognition to the Western ear. This is the representation of the nuances in the deviation from tempered intervals on the Istrian folk instrument sopele. Dario Marušić took acoustic measurements on various instruments between 1999 and 2002. Plus and minus designate the deviations measured in cents from the tempered intervals higher and lower accordingly. But let's look at the piece that we are all familiar with to see how it would sound in an Istrian scale. From here, we will move to art music. Some of the early definitions of art music come from the 9th century as the idea of the musical composition as an intentional and concise creations. Most musicologists accredit the first separation of art music from folk to Guido d'Arezzo and his invention of staff notation, which allowed composers to define pitch, rhythm, meter, and tempo for the performer. So, art music, also called serious music or Western classical music, is usually predefined, written by a composer, written in notation, and executed by professional performers. There is compositional structure, technical mastery is needed, and psychological and aesthetic content. For example, blending a pleasant and lengthier melody, verse written by a poet and notated, elaborated accompaniment into an art song. But why to create a scale, and how would we use it? With political independence movement in the early 19th century and the emergence of the new nations in Europe, the musical nationalist movement emerged as a reaction against the dominant classical tradition, with emphasis on notational musical elements such as the use of folk songs, folk dances and rhythms, or the adoption of nationalist subjects for operas and symphonic poems, or other forms of music. Composers were abandoning Italian, French and German standards, bringing their own traditions into art music. With the formation of the Istrian scale, Western traditional boundaries were pushed, bringing the peasant motifs into their unrefined character to these elite circles in the guise of orchestral and piano compositions. The Istrian scale would serve as means of codification, transcribing the intervals of the oral Istrian tradition into a formula that fits the Western system of equal temperament. Let's hear an example of an art composition in Istrian spirit employing the scale. Franjo Ksaver Kuhač, Ludvik Kuba, Matko Brajša Rašan, Božidar Širola, Vinko Žganec, Stanislav Preprek, and Ivan Matetič Rongo are the diligent scholars who contributed to the understanding of these stylistic specialties. In 1881, Franjo Kuhač was among the first to publish his adaptation of Istrian folk tunes in a collection entitled South Slovene National Songs. Unfortunately, this collection misses the mark on multiple counts of authenticity. His attempts at notating the foreign pitches ultimately resulted in mixed mode compositions, blending majors and minors. Cursory transcriptions, as well as questionable solutions for reconciling the melodies within the Western system, also characterize this collection. In addition, Kuhač took the liberty of setting the melodies in four-part harmony, not standing by their traditional two-voice structure. A more successful attempt can be found in the collection of 50 folk tunes of Istria, published by Matko Brajša Rašan in 1910. And interestingly, Brajša Rašan, who was not musically educated, understood the crucial moments in the tone structure more intuitively. He decided to start his melodies on E by the example of the Phrygian mode, this way making the notation easier with less accidentals. Vinko Žganec, on the other hand, was certain that the first step should be a minor second. Stanislav Preprek presented his scale very originally as two-voiced examples. Minor thirds apart, Preprek established the terminology of a tone row, today commonly used in ethnomusicology, following the length of the tone structure only as it appears in folk songs. In the Istrian case, only a hexatonic tone row rather than a full scale. He defined Istrian as having two types of tone rows, which are in origin identical, the only difference being the starting interval between the first and second scale degree. Type A starting with the major second, and type B with the minor second. Finally, Ivan Matetič Rongo, who was originally from the Istrian village of Rongi, was eager to preserve his musical heritage, applying the scale as the basis of most of his works. In 1925, he published his extensive research in several articles on the Istrian scale, on the notation of the Istrian chants, and more on the notation of Istrian chants. From his collection emerged the concept of the Istrian tone row, employed by all subsequent theorists and researchers, to some extent still in use today. It must be remembered that the Istrian tonality functions independently of the principles of Western voice leading. Dominant and leading tone cadential formulas play no role in music of this genre. Instead, Istrian melodies conclude in the unison or octave. From early writings of the folk music, the term modality is often used, which generally indicates a system of organization of musical intervals on which music is composed. For example, the ancient or the Oriental systems such as Chinese, Arabic, Greek, which can employ intervals which are smaller than a minor second, or non-fixed pitch tones. In Western musical culture, two major modal systems were codified: Greek in the 6th century before BC and Gregorian chants in 9th century AD. Based on the repertoire for liturgical songs, 8 Gregorian modes were established and correspond to 8 types of scales, each built as a conjunction of 2 diatonic tetrachords. With the 16th century's development of the new harmonic sensitivity, only 2 modes remained in use. Today they are referred to as the major and the minor. So we have all these different scales. If we think about the addressing problem of the name Istrian scale, it begins with generally accepted scale of E, F, G, A flat, B flat, and C flat. According to some musicologists, the more appropriate name would be the Istrian tone row, given that it does not possess 8 tones, such as the classical scales. According to other musicologists, it is enough to use the adjective so-called Istrian scale. Again, others claim it should be the Istrian modus. It also appears under the name of hexatonic scale. This way, the name Istrian scale remains reserved for the octatonic structure, created based on Phrygian mode elaboration of symmetric scale principle. Let's look at the Phrygian mode. It starts from E to E, and that's how they also started the scale, as we said. But then already it differentiates. So when Matetic Rongo played around with the modes, he changed a little bit the Dorian mode and a little bit the Phrygian mode. He gave them some flats. Vinko Žganec made his own decisions, but Stanislav Preprek was the one who really made it into 2 voices. Rongo took his example, but made it his own. Ivan Matentic further said, what if we combine 2 tone rows? So he did the first one starting with the half step, then he exchanged the C flat for just a B natural, and this way from E to E we get the octatonic scale. The more I was researching this scale, the more I noticed that there were ties to it, also to another territory, and that's the Soviet. Rimsky-Korsakov had his own so-called gamma that he always gave as a secret formula to his students. One began with the half step, and the other one with the full step. This is also called the symmetric scale. The Istrian scale is a row of 8 tones arranged in a specific intervallic sequence, theoretically systemizing the folk music of the Istrian peninsula. Let's look at some examples found in classical compositions. This one is from Liszt un Sospiro. Let's look at the bass line. There are more examples in his music, and so there are some also in Chopin. This one is from his Chopin, from his Ballade number 1. And there are many more. Accused of participating in national agenda, many Slovenian artists were sent to remote places near the Hungarian border and on remote Croatian islands in an attempt to isolate and shut down their artistic voices. However, isolation only strengthened their ties to own traditions, as they grew even more determined to embrace and preserve their musical heritage upon the return home after World War II. The Slovene composers, both born in Trieste just a few years apart, are Karel Pahor, born in 1896, and Danilo Švara in 1902. They are both described as supporters of the pre-avant-garde, embracing the spirit of social realism, both exposed to the untempered Istrian mellows early in their life and devoting themselves to folklore. In 1950, Pahor wrote a cycle of 15 pieces titled Istrijanka, and 7 years later, Švara followed with his most famous work, Sinfonia da Camera, in modo istriano. Karel Pahor is today known as the Slovenian composer, but he was variously a citizen of Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Kingdom of Italy, Free Territory of Trieste, and the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. As a young boy, Pahor was introduced to music in three ways: by Istrian workers who were helping his father, by Hungarian soldiers in Trieste during the occupation, and at the house of their better-standing neighbors. Pahor crossed paths with Ivan Matetić Rongo in Banja Luka, and later, when Pahor spent time as a partisan in Bela Krajina region on the Croatian border during the war, Istrijanka was composed as a piano work and dedicated to Matetić Rongo. He adapted Istrijanka for symphonic queens, and under the title of a suite, this assortment of artistic interpretations of folk songs is presented in short dance-type compositions. This collection was inspired by everyday and celebratory songs such as lullabies, wedding song, mazurkas, and poskočnice, which literally means jumpy, following the written-out folk tunes collected by Matko Brajša-Rašan and Ivan Matetić Rongo. The miniatures are short music themes, and the original contrasts are not only presented in tempo but also character markings. In the suite, Pahor maintained the primacy of the Istrian scale, the sequencing of whole tones and half tones, a narrow melodic range, the two-voice patterns, and always concluding from diminished or minor thirds into the final unison. Although the manuscript found at the National University Library in Ljubljana is missing the exact date of this creation, the collection was officially printed and published in 1950. Petra's edition published 4 dances in 1974 as part of the collection The Yugoslav Youth Album for Piano, edited by Marian Lipušek. Here we have the very first one. I did cut out some parts so that I present the diminished thirds, but let's look at it. So this is the melody. So just 1, 2, 3, 4 tones. That's all that we have for the melody. The second voice has this. So it's kind of like the sopele that we heard earlier, right? And the interesting thing is that he spells out the entire scale. Eventually adding the thirds. The conclusion of the first part is this. This diminished third that it's really, really crunchy. Again spells out the scale. Repeats. The conclusion is the same. Diminished third, but this time he gives it a fifth. We will hear the same exact thing in the second one, where we will have very crunchy intervals. So we will constantly have these seconds. This time, only 3 tones in the melody. 1, 2, 3. Then he moves everything up. Again, just 3 tones with this constant dissonance here. And again, he moves it higher. Diminished third to unisono. Diminished third to unisono. Diminished third to unisono. The third one has all scales spelled out. Diminished third to unisono. Fourth one is kind of like a 2-voice game. First, the right hand says the theme, then the left hand says it, then the right hand says it, then the left hand says it. And I'm sure by now you heard the diminished thirds. Just like the rest of them, it ends on A. The one that most fascinates me is the one that is pretty fast. So this one is in fifths, but open fifths, and then it moves up. Finally, the last one is a little heavier character. As we heard in the folk music, this is very common. It signifies the D sharp and the F, which is a diminished third. So it has it right at the beginning, just to make it a little bit different. Okay, let's hear now the entire set. Thanks to Luisa, we were able to find this from the Slovenian archives. Just for the comparison. So even in orchestra, it's really exciting. Let's look again at what we said at the beginning. There was the Istrian folklore. From music research, the ethnomusicology and musicology, they looked at musical acoustic, the science of instruments, and the psychological and sociological and philosophical standpoint of view. And the ethnomusicologists were trying to transcribe it into something that they could hold on to. The music nationalism just sped that up. From there, the creation of the Istrian scale, which later was used in art music, as we heard it just now. So from here, the conclusion. I did not want to only come up with a concise definition and to say clear the name of Istrian scale. My intention was to spread awareness, protect the Istrian heritage, and facilitate the accessibility to the public. I am very thankful that I had the chance and the ability to show where are the folk connections and how they lead to art music. There are specific issues of the Istrian scale on the piano. As you noticed it's not very easy, and not everything just lays under the hands. However, this scale and the folk melodies inspired composers of generations after generations from different nationalities and cultures. And for the end, I would just like to thank my committee members, Professor Paul Berkowitz, Professor Isabel Baragdarian, and Professor Robert Koenig, and of course, Dr. Luisa Antoni, who has helped me throughout this entire research. I would also like to thank Mirjana Veljovic and Branko Radic from the Academy of Pula and the National Library of Slovenia for the manuscripts. Also, thank you everyone who has helped this research come through for me. Thank you and have a good day.